Hello YouTubers and fellow computer nerds, welcome back to episode 2 where I'm trying to resurrect this old Teletek Systemaster single board S-100 system. See if it's still got some life in it. Not too much has happened since episode 1. I have done some research, a lot of research. I've done a little bit of shopping and I've come to a few conclusions about how I want to do this. First off, before we talk too much about the power situation right now is the major issue with getting this thing up and running, getting the proper voltages to it. And I want to keep this as original as possible. I don't want to modify it. Various forums talk about bypassing the regulator so you can just feed this thing 5 volts, which is easy enough to come by. There's lots of 5 volt power supplies on the market. Heck, I've got a lot of 5 volt power supplies. But I want to keep this as original as possible. And even if I do that, bypass the regulator, I've still got the problem of the RS-232 level shifters up here. Still need the plus and minus 16 volts to operate. Now again, I can bypass them, and I could use a USB to RS-232 dongle with TTL level inputs and outputs. I could just pull these chips out and connect the dongle up to the appropriate pins on the sockets. And if I ever decide I need to sell this thing, I can always put the pit chips back in. So that's one way to do it. But that doesn't help me test out whether these chips are any good. It'd be nice to know whether they're any good or not. So I think I'm going to go ahead and try to get it this plus and minus 16 volts at once. Now, the first thing I bought was an S-100 edge card connector. So I can plug this card in to the edge card connector, and I can solder my power lines to the appropriate pins on the edge card connector, and I don't have to touch the board. So that'll help keep the board original. So now I just need the power. Okay. I think I showed you in the last video that the manual says we need 8 volts at 2 amps, plus 16 volts at 50 milliamps, minus 16 volts at 50 milliamps. Okay, as for the plus 8 volts, that has turned out to be pretty difficult to find. One suggestion I've seen in a couple places on the forums is to buy a 9 volt switching power supply that has an adjustable output. Usually they're adjustable by like 5 or 10%, and just tune it down to like 8.5 volts, and the regulator will just run a little bit hotter, but it should work just fine. So that's a possibility. And I have found a few of those power supplies for sale on eBay and other places. And that power supply would have plenty of output. It could supply, power for more than one card. Yeah, I wanted to keep this small, I wanted to keep it down to one card, but now I'm thinking, well, maybe I want to build a small system with multiple cards. I don't know, I did buy 2 edge card connectors, and I know where I can buy a blank backplane board or 2. And I know where I can get more edge card connectors, so okay. This is sort of spiraling out of control. Let me just get this card up and running and make sure it works before I start building a whole system around it, okay? So, rather than buying the big power supply that can handle multiple cards, I found a little power supply, plugs in the wall, just a little brick type power supply that used to supply power to a credit card reader or some sort of point of sale terminal. 8 volts, 3 amps output. That's going to power this just fine. So I ordered that off eBay. Hasn't arrived yet. During the pandemic, deliveries take a long time to get here. I've ordered a lot of stuff, and it's just taken forever to get here. I mean, heck, this board took quite a while to get here when I ordered it. So I'm not sure when that's going to get here. Okay, so that takes care of the 8-volt power supply. That should be enough to power the logic. I still need the plus and minus 16 volts to power the level shifters, and I'm sure it's only the level shifters that need it. Everything else on this board is 5-volt logic. So, and also, I think that it should work just fine on plus and minus 15 volts. And I have seen a few plus and minus 15 volt supplies out there for sale. Again, they're pretty much overkill. They would handle a whole lot of cards like this. But they're out there. So that's a possibility. I'm pretty sure plus and minus 15 volts would just work just fine. I'm pretty sure these 4 chips would work just fine on it. But then I was rooting around in my junk collection, which is pretty extensive, as any computer geeks is liable to be, and I found this. It is the power supply from a defunct HP printer, which I hung on to for no good reason, but apparently there was a good reason. Its output is 32 volts. So this will put out 32 volts. Now, I need plus and minus 16. 32 is twice 16. So I got to thinking, I could build something like this, and I could get plus and minus 16 volts out of that 32 volt power supply. Have the plus 32 volts coming in here, 32 volt return going back to the power supply, couple resistors as a voltage divider, center tap to ground this to the computer board. Do not ground this, of course, ground this. A couple of electrolytic capacitors, and voila, I've got plus 16 volts and minus 16 volts with respect to ground. This thing, how much current can it supply? Boy, that's some tiny print. 1550 milliamps, so that's over 1.5 amps. So this thing could supply an entire rack full of cards like this and probably have some oomph left over. So I think this is what I'm going to go with. I may add a couple of fuses to it just so I don't wind up smoking anything on the board if something's drawing a little too much current. But that's a simple solution to the problem, at least, you know, to get this thing up and running and talking. So I'm going to go ahead and build this. Maybe I'll have that ready soon. Maybe not by the next episode, but soon. Also, rooting around in my junk pile, I found a USB to RS-232 dongle with a breakout board on the end, so I have access to all the different wires. Now that's going to be important because I've been reading on the forums that this thing can be a little difficult to get wired up to a terminal. It's kind of flaky, and it wants things done just so, and sometimes if it doesn't work you need to swap a couple of wires around on the control signals. So I won't need a null modem this way, because a lot of people say you need a null modem in there. So I can just, you know, wire it up as it needs to be just to get this thing talking. So got that covered. That's good. So really all I need now is the 8-volt power supply to show up. So that could be a little while. Before I get too far along with this thing towards powering it up, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop out this EEPROM chip, and I'm going to put it in my EEPROM reader writer, and I'm going to copy out the contents and save it, just so I have the firmware in here backed up in case something bad happens. In case, you know, I really foul up and smoke some chips on this board, at least I'll have the firmware backed up. Also, hopefully, once I dump this out, I can look through it and see if there's anything in there that says what version of this firmware it is. If it's the firmware that actually goes with this board. I don't even know that. It may be something custom somebody installed at some point. I can't seem to figure out what was originally supposed to be in here. Hopefully when I dump it, it'll say something like Teletek Systemaster in there. That would be great. Then I would know I've got the right stuff, and all the stuff in the manual that it says this thing can do, it'll be able to do. So once I do, I'll do that. I'll dump out the ROM, and then once I do get it powered up, I'm going to take it slow. I think what I'll do is I'll probe around on the Z80, looking at the address data lines, some of the control signals, and make sure I'm actually seeing some activity there, that it's not flatlined. The thing's actually working. I'll make sure it's getting a clock. I'll make sure it's actually running through whatever wait loop it's running through while it's waiting to talk to a terminal. You know, if it's flatlined, then I know I've got to start doing some more serious troubleshooting. Also, I think what I will do before I start messing with this too much is I will document the position of all of the jumpers on the boards, where they are now, what's jumpered, what's open, just so in case I start having to mess with the jumpers to try and get it working, I'll at least have a baseline of where it was when I got it, and I can always return it to that if it turns out messing with the jumpers doesn't fix the problem. You know, it's like, okay, let me put it back the way it was and try something else. So I'm going to document the position of all the jumpers. Eventually, I'm going to need an enclosure for this thing too. I don't want it just left open where, you know, stuff can get dropped on it, where it can get dusty. It needs to be in some kind of enclosure when I'm working with it. So I'm going to have to build something. What I may do is mount this to some sort of plate or board, and then cover it with something, so that just to keep it nice and clean, and out of the keep the cat hair off of it. We have a cat. We'll have 2 cats shortly. Keep the dust off of it. Keep the bird dander off of it. We got a couple parrots. So keep it clean. I may have to provide cooling for the regulator heat sink here. So I'll probably 3D print some brackets. I love my 3D printer. It's great to have one. Highly recommended. Anybody who doesn't have one. I'll probably print some brackets that'll hold it, hold the card edge, and hold the, well, actually there are no screw holes in this. I should have got one with screw holes, but I guess it's not going to matter really. I'll just hold the card firmly with something along the edge, and screw it down to a plate or a board or something, and then fabricate some kind of cover for it, just so nothing bad happens to it. So I've kind of got my work cut out for me here. Waiting for that 8-volt power supply to get here. Got to build this doohickey and solder some wires onto the edge card connector. I also need to figure out, of course it's all in the manual, I just need to figure out I think this is serial port 0 up here. So I need to figure out the pinout of this connector, which is in the manual, and figure out in advance how I'm going to wire it to this. So hopefully I will be able to talk to a terminal on my laptop, terminal program on my laptop. We'll see if that all comes together. So anyway, that's just sort of a little update. Like I said, not a whole lot of progress made so far. I am waiting on the trusty, rusty wheels of the delivery companies out there to make their way through the pandemic back order overload and bring me the stuff I've ordered. And in the meantime, I'm going to work on some other aspects of this. You know, 3D print some brackets for holding the card and figure out some kind of enclosure for it, and read out that ROM. So anyway, thanks for watching. We'll see you back here in episode 3 once I've made a little bit more progress. Subscribe to see those future videos. Give this video a like, a thumbs up if you found it at all interesting or educational, or just killed a little time during pandemic lockdown. Thanks for watching. Have a good one. Bye.